Most of us grew up with the assumption that the world is real, good, and full of purpose, created by a loving God. This is largely the view of mainstream Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So you've likely heard this perspective before. But even within this lens, difficult questions arise. If the world is real and good, why does so much suffering and cruelty exist? So, how do billions of people make sense of a world that is beautiful, terrifying, and unpredictable all at once? On this channel, we are exploring the four main lenses of reality our ancestors left for us in response to the question, what is this place? What is this world that we are experiencing? Last time I explored the lens that's rarely acknowledged in mainstream theology, the idea that the world is real but not created by a benevolent God, that a mistake happened, something went wrong. It's a radical view found in the Gnostic texts and a few others that challenges the assumption that creation is inherently good. This is one of the most controversial lenses that you can learn more about in my episode titled, Was This World a Mistake? Quick pause if you're new here. I'm Erica, and for years I've been exploring the world, studying ancient wisdom, forgotten stories, and the ways that nature teaches us to live in harmony, gathering stories, practices, and perspectives to help us navigate this wild classroom that I like to call Earth School. And today I'm turning to a perspective that's far more familiar, one held across the three major Abrahamic traditions, which is billions of people around the globe. This perspective says the world is real. It is created by a benevolent God and it carries intention and meaning. In this episode, we'll explore how mainstream Judaism, Christianity, and Islam approach these questions. And I use the term mainstream because, as we saw in the last episode titled, Was This World a Mistake?, where we explored the mystical Christian texts like the secret book of John and on the origins of the world that do not agree with the perspective that I'm about to share. So those Christian texts are outside of the mainstream, as is the case with mystical Islamic and Jewish texts. So for the sake of language, we will explore in this episode how quote unquote mainstream Judaism, Christianity, and Islam see creation and purpose in this reality that they deem both real and good. Now, I want to start out by saying that mainstream Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are incredibly vast and diverse faiths, and I cannot possibly capture the entirety of these faiths in just one short episode. So I have to speak generally with bullet points. So please keep that in mind. Let's start with creation itself. All three traditions affirm a single transcendent God who created the world and sustains it. Now, God is often called different things like Yahweh, Allah, Hashim, but for the sake of ease, I'm just going to use the word God mostly, so learn how to translate. According to these traditions, the world isn't just a random arrangement of matter. In Genesis, we see creation unfolding in deliberate stages. So, right, we have light, sky, land, vegetation, animals, and then finally humans. Each phase is declared good. The word isn't poetic, at least in my interpretations. It's more like a mark of satisfaction of intention with each phase good. Humans, earthlings, aren't accidental. We're not pawns in a chaotic universe. In these phases, we are made intentionally. We're kind of like agents entrusted with responsibility, choice, and relationship. In all three faiths, human beings are created on purpose, for a purpose, and placed inside a world that is real, meaningful, and deeply connected to the divine. So, what's the purpose? In all three traditions, part of the human purpose is to live in an active, ongoing relationship with God. The active relationship with God is the anchor of human purpose in all three traditions, even when they're expressed a little differently. So in Judaism, that takes shape through covenant. Covenant is like a divinely initiated agreement in which, like, God promises to be in a relationship with the Jewish people, and the people commit to living according to God's guidance and the commandments. It's really the foundation of the Jewish faith and practice from how I personally understand it. In Christianity, the relationship with God is rooted in faith in Jesus Christ. This faith opens the way to communion and ongoing like fellowship with God, and it's made possible really through Christ. So daily life for Christians becomes a reflection of divine love. Christians believe that faith unites them to Jesus, who reconciles humanity with God. This union with Christ is central to the Christian faith, appearing over 200 times in the New Testament. In Islam, the relationship with God is lived through ibadah, which is, from my understanding, means like worship and devotion to Allah. Ibadah is expressed not only through ritual practices such as praying 5 times a day, but it's also through everyday ordinary actions, which becomes worship when done with sincerity and like this intention to please God. It is one of the most central concepts in Islamic life, from how I understand it. It's a way of living where every thought, word, and deed can be an act of worship when directed towards Allah with sincerity. Across all three Abrahamic faiths, the message is the exact same. This relationship with God isn't meant to be passive. It is something tended to daily and in a variety of ways. Another central idea to these faiths is the idea of moral responsibility. Humans have free will, and our choices carry weight. Every action contributes to shaping the world towards healing or harm, and this ethical dimension is considered an essential part of being human. Connected to this is the idea of stewardship. So in Genesis, humanity is placed in the garden to work and guard it. In Islam, humans are described as caretakers of the earth. In Christianity, being made in the image of God includes caring for creation with respect and wisdom. Stewardship of the land, resources, animals, and communities is viewed as a sacred responsibility. Human life is also understood as inherently communal. These traditions really emphasize that we are meant to live in relationships with others, to care for the vulnerable, to practice hospitality, and to build ethical and just communities. Now, everyone has a different idea on what ethical and just looks like, but it's still a central concept. In these traditions, purpose isn't something we fulfill alone. It's expressed through how we treat one another and contribute to the world around us. All three traditions also affirm that the physical world is real, good, and intentionally made. It is not a mistake. It is not an illusion. In Judaism, the rhythm of creation repeats the phrase, and God saw that it was good. In Christianity, creation is honored to the extent that God enters it directly through incarnation. By becoming human in Jesus Christ, God confirms the goodness of the created world and shows that the material realm is worthy of divine presence. In Islam, creation is filled with signs, reminders, the divine woven into nature and experience. The material world is meaningful in Islam and spiritually significant. At the same time, these traditions teach that the physical world is not the only layer of reality. So it's real, it's just not the only reality. The spiritual realm, God, souls, angels, the moral consequences of our choices, and the afterlife is equally real. This life matters profoundly, but it is not the final word. There's more beyond this world, or the world to come, as they would say in Judaism, and resurrection and new creation in Christianity, and paradise and the day of judgment in Islam. Together, these ideas form a shared worldview that humans have purpose, the world is meaningful, and our lives unfold in a non-physical and spiritual dimension that are deeply intertwined. Nothing is random. Everything carries meaning, even if it's veiled to our understanding. Yet even here, the tension is real. All three Abrahamic traditions wrestle deeply with the problems of evil. If God created a good world, then why does so much suffering and cruelty exist? Why do people suffer? Why does tragedy strike seemingly innocent lives? Each tradition wrestles with these questions in different ways, but also have many overlapping beliefs. And each tradition distinguishes the difference between moral evil, which is like human caused suffering, like violence and cruelty, and then natural evil, which is suffering beyond human choice. So something like a disease or a natural disaster. Judaism doesn't deny this tension. It acknowledged the tension directly. Moral evil is often explained as the misuse of free will or a failure to live within the covenant. Natural evil is harder for them to explain from my understanding. The Hebrew Bible sometimes interprets it as divine judgment, but the book of Job insists that innocent suffering exists and cannot be neatly justified. Jewish tradition often holds both protest and trust together, crying out against suffering while affirming that God's wisdom is probably beyond human grasp. So in Judaism, suffering might be a mystery. It might be a test or maybe like a prompt for ethical action or repair. Christianity teaches that moral evil arises from the fall, which goes back to Genesis, right? When Adam and Eve disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden, bringing sin and suffering and death to the world. It marks humanity's transition from innocence and communion with God to guilt, alienation, and mortality. The fall is a very Christian interpretation of Genesis, and this belief is not generally shared within Judaism or Islam. The fall to Christians is a consequence of free will, and it explains why suffering, evil, and death exists in a world created good, whether that's moral evil or natural evil. This view really highlights the need for Christ, because without the fall, you wouldn't need Christ because redemption wouldn't be necessary. That is why Christ is very much needed. The resurrection is then seen as the ultimate answer, really. So suffering and tragedy are real, but they do not have the final word in Christianity. Islam explains moral evil as the result of human wrongdoing and disobedience to Allah's guidance. Natural evil is often framed as a test of faith or like a trial meant to cultivate things like patience and gratitude and compassion. So even when suffering feels unjust, Muslims trust that Allah's wisdom is greater than the human understanding, and that trials may carry hidden mercy or a different, a hidden purpose that's also kind of shared within Christianity and Judaism as well. Both moral and natural evils are opportunities to turn back to God and to live faithfully. So none of these three traditions teach that God creates suffering out of cruelty. Judaism sees suffering as a consequence or maybe a mystery within the covenant. Christianity traces it to human free will and a fallen creation, and Islam frames it as a test of faith under Allah's wisdom. All three agree that the world was created good, but both moral evil and natural evil are permitted within creation. So what's the takeaway from this lens? In mainstream Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the world is real, it's good, and it's purposeful. Life is not random, and humans are not accidents. We matter. Our choices, our relationships, and how we care for the world around us are all part of fulfilling the meaning built into the reality itself. Even when suffering or injustice crushes our hearts, these traditions remind us that life has depth, significance, and connection to something larger than ourselves. But this isn't the only way our ancestors tried to make sense of reality. In fact, the mystical side of these three traditions go in a completely different direction. They suggest the world we experience might not be ultimately real. It exists, we interact with it, but it's more like a dream, an illusion. And that perspective opens up a whole other set of questions about life, suffering, and purpose. In the next episode, we're going to explore that lens, the idea that reality itself might be an illusion, and what it means to live in a world that feels real but isn't quite what it seems. You won't want to miss this one. So if you're curious, make sure you hit subscribe and come with me as we travel through ancient texts, cultures, and philosophies to see how each one answers the question, what is this place?